The following is a presentation of Hoka Palizzo, with funding in part from the Columbia Festival of the Arts and support from Metzler's Nursery.
Writing Life. I'm Michael Durda, and with me today is Ashley Bryan, one of America's most distinguished storytellers, artists, and teachers. He is the author of many books, several dealing with Black American spirituals and African or Caribbean folk tales. Among them, Turtle Knows Your Name, Beat the Story Drum, Pum Pum, Climbing Jacob's Ladder, and several others. Mr. Bryan has won many awards. I'm told at least 9, but others say 12, and several Coretta Scott King Awards in particular. It's a great honor for Ashley Bryan to be with us here today. Ashley, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how someone gets such an enviable gift for writing and illustrating. You're both an artist and a storyteller. Did they grow up together, so to speak, or did you find yourself drawn first to art and then storytelling, or how did this come about?
Well, with me, they grew up together because growing up in New York City in the Bronx during the Depression years, the public schools were very open, and I had good background and training there. And from kindergarten, we started making our own books. We were doing the pictures. We started with the alphabet. We do a picture for each letter. And then when we completed it, we'd sew it together, and the teacher said, "You published a book. You're the author, the illustrator, the binder, and take it home. You're the distributor as well." And that began the making of books. It meant I was involved in all the processes, the writing and the drawing. And it's what I've loved, and I've continued it because I made books as presents for family and friends. So I've always done both.
Did you think you were going to be a book illustrator, or were you drawn at one point to perhaps being a writer or a poet, or a sense of a pure artist, or how did your interest in children's books come about?
The work with the children's books came about through my love of doing stories and pictures for them as gifts to family and friends. And someone told an editor at Athenaeum Publishers about this man in the Bronx in his studio doing all these books for family and friends. And she came to see me and then sent a contract for me to do my work, which reached the wider audience. But it was that way that it came about. I'm a painter. I love to draw and paint. But it's quite natural for artists to draw to images, things that they read. And I've always done pictures to what I've read. And that's why you enter a museum, so much of the art of the museum has to do with literature, biblical stories, work with histories, with all kinds of things of Greek mythology or whatever. But they are texts to which artists have seen images and then created their own from that source. So it's quite natural for me to move from my work as a painter to doing the books.
You've specialized pretty much in folk tales, Black American spirituals. Yes. Was this from the beginning, or did you gradually evolve and focus your interest on these areas? What was your first book about?
It's something that's always been there. As I like to say, my first book was that ABC book in kindergarten. But the first book published by Athenaeum really was the African folk tales, you see, and it's that I built on. And I began my work with a retelling of the African folk tales because the forms from which I worked were very brief. A paragraph or two which document a story idea, but it has nothing to do with the way you tell a story. So I did not want to use those forms with my pictures. So I began then retelling the stories, bringing to it the influence of the Black American poets on the rhythm, the beat, the sound, the language of the way I would tell the story.
The poetry is obviously a great influence on your prose. It's very rhythmic. In some ways, you could almost say that the texts in your children's books are scripts for performance. When we'll be hearing you read in a little while, it's obvious that you bring a lot of particular and personal interpretation to your stories and the texts. How did you become interested in poetry? Is this, again, just part of your background, or did you hang out with poets in New York while you were growing up?
I became interested in poetry essentially from the performance aspect of poetry, the need of poetry to be heard. Generally, there are very few performers of our literature of English and American poetry, but like song, it needs the voice. And so in elementary school, we all took turns preparing a poem and then reading before the class. And that stayed with me. And so in my programs, I always read from the Black American poets to open up the play of the voice and the printed word. That is to make the connection for the child that the printed word in the book has a voice, just as the printed note in music has a voice, has a sound. That connection is often not made, and so a child may stumble through with pronunciation and not hearing. And so by reading and holding the book and playing with the voice, that identity of what is happening in the voice is from the printed word is made clear. And then I use those devices of poetry in the prose of my stories.
In a way, you have these complete artworks in that you have the voice telling the story, you have the story you've written, you've done the illustrations. Do the illustrations work in a particular way with the text? Are we meant to look at them simultaneously with the story, or do they complement it, enrich it? How do you think about the rhythm of pictures and words in a storybook?
I always feel that the images must be like partners, companions. They don't sit on the story, but they companion the story. They're a part of it. And there are different ways in which I see the images to companion a story. I'm doing Turtle Knows Your Name. I see it in the full, rich colors of the Caribbean, and I work in that way. When I was doing the Dancing Granny, I wanted the rhythm of the dance, the spirit of the figure moving. So the whole point of that in the illustration was to keep that figure dancing, right through with swift brush paintings. So each book evokes another way of seeing it, that is to partner the text, to carry the text along.
How about the medium? You obviously you're excellent graphic artist, draftsman, but many of your books seem to prefer woodcuts or what look like woodcuts that are. How do you choose the kind of art that you're going to employ for a certain story?
Very often it has to do with a certain connection that I want to make. In my first two books of the Black American spirituals, Walk Together Children, I'm Going to Sing, I used block prints. I wanted them to have the feeling of the early religious books, early medieval times, cut in blocks, printed by hand. And in order to make that connection, I worked then with the blocks. I also, in that case, cut the music so that the page would have that complete effect of the handmade book, of the block printed book. And I made that connection because I wanted that feeling of those early medieval times to carry over into what I was doing in that selection. And it was in that way that I could open up that connection for myself as the artist. Now, you looking at it might not know this. That's not important. To me, the motivation is important because that gives me the direction in which I would work.
You have some favorite words. You always like, I've noticed several times you, or how did this come about? Just the rhythm of the sentences seem to demand these kinds of phrases to help give more of a speaking tone to a story. Yeah. They do stand out when people read your books.
Well, it's so much a part of Black life.
Well, anybody's life, actually.
I'm including that in the speak. And so I've always included it in my stories, so much so that if I do a story without it, my little friend will say to me, that's not an story. You know?
Well, maybe this is a good way to introduce Turtle Knows Your Name, which also has its share of uh-huhs and uh-uhs. Now, Mr. Ashley Bryan is going to read from Turtle Knows Your Name.
Turtle Knows Your Name. Once there was a little boy, and he had a very long name. His name was Upsilimana Tumpalarado. It was easy to pronounce. Up-silly-mana Tum-pa-larado. But it was hard to remember. His grandmother raised him in her village by the sea. She taught him to walk. She taught him to talk, but teaching him to walk and to talk, it wasn't the same as teaching him to say his name. That took time, and Granny took her time. She said his name to him slowly. Upsilimana Tumpalarado. Up, Uppala tumpalo, said the grandson. Said the granny, shaking her head from side to side. She didn't give up, though. Turtle takes his time, she said. I take mine, and you take your time, too. And he did. Then, one day, he said it. Upsilimana Tampalarado. Aha! Cried the grandmother. She was so happy. She hugged him once. She kissed him twice. She spun him around a wee 3 times. She shook his hand, then took his hand, and they ran down to the sandy beach. Here's where we dance your name dance, said Granny. Sing your name aloud and clear. Sing it to me. Sing it to the sea. Granny clapped as they danced. Her grandson sang, Upsilimana Tampalabrado, that's my name. I took my time to learn it. Won't you do the same? Turtle, who lived nearby, heard the singing and swam closer. The villagers always came to the shore to sing and dance their children's names. Turtle loved to gather names, and he never missed a name dance. Turtle was older than anyone could tell. He even remembered Granny's name when she danced as a little girl with her Granny on the shore. Turtle raised his head above the water and listened. Upsilimana Tampalarado, that's my name, sang the boy again and again. A long name, said Turtle, but a good song name to dance to. I think I've got it. Turtle flipped and dove to the bottom of the sea. In his coral home, Turtle smoothed the space and spelled the name with shells. He blinked and said, Upsilimana Tampalarado, I know it well. Now that her grandson knew it well too, Granny let him go out alone to play in the village. Each time he set out to play, she'd say, Upsilimana Tampalarado, teach your name to your playmates and do your best. Remember, your name is long, but it is not the longest. Upsilimana Tampalarado always had a good time playing with the village children. He learned their names quickly. Zamba, Mogans, Dandu, Brashi. And he remembered them. He taught them his name too, but no one ever remembered it. Oh, long name, they call. Your turn to hide the stick. My name is not long name, he'd say. My name is Upsilimana Tampalarado. Aha, they'd say. But it's still your turn, long name. His name was the longest. What then did Granny mean when she'd say, your name is long, but it's not the longest? One morning, Upsilimana Tampalarado said, Granny, I'm not going to be called long name today. I'm going to play with the animals. Don't be late for dinner, said Granny. I'm cooking fungi. Fungi, exclaimed the boy. Uh-huh, said Granny. If you're late, I might be tempted to eat all the fungi myself. Uh-huh, said the boy. I won't be late. You'll see. Bye, Granny. Twa, twee, hee. Off he went, whistling. Twee, twa, twee, twee, twa, twee. He ran past Pig in the pasture, past pawpaw and palm trees till he came to the beach. He splashed in the sea whistling, twee, twa, twee. Turtle heard the splashing. He swam up to the boy and said, Upsilimana Tampalarado, I'm so glad you came. Upsilimana Tampalarado, Turtle knows your name. The boy slapped the water for joy. Splish, splash, splish, splash. Turtle, oh Turtle, he cried, how did you know that my name is Upsilimana Tampalarado? Turtle didn't stay to play or answer questions. He dove under the waves and disappeared. The boy called and called till his stomach ached, but Turtle did not return. I've yelled myself hoarse, hollow, and hungry, he said to himself. The fungi! Oh, the fungi! He ran as fast as he could go. He ran past pawpaw and palm trees, past pig in the pasture, past cow who grazed and mooed, past goat bounding high over the rocks, blah, blah, past donkey in the field, hee-haw, hee-haw. He ran into his house crying, Granny, Granny, please, I'm hungry, the fungi, the fungi. With her large wooden spoon, Granny was turning the cornmeal in the pot. She smiled at her grandson as she ladled some into a buttered bowl and shook it till it was round as a grapefruit. She rolled it onto her grandson's plate of fish. Thank you, Granny. Fungi rolled in a bowl till it's round as a ball and as yellow as gold is the best of all. Sing it, said Granny. She hummed as she shook a bowl of fungi for herself. Fungi rolled in a bowl till it's round as a ball and as yellow as gold is the best of all. They finished eating the fungi and fish. Then Granny set a plate of bread pudding and a sweet potato pie on the table. He who asks, don't get. He who don't ask, don't want, said Granny. Granny always said that before offering dessert. She'd laugh as she watched the puzzled look on her grandson's face. Then she'd offer him a way out. Tell me a proverb, she'd say, and I'll give you dessert. A proverb? No problem, Upsalamana Tumpalarato would say. He had learned lots of proverbs. He'd answer with, a man can't grow taller than his head. Or, you'll never catch a black cat at night. His favorite was, if a baboon wants to whistle, don't stop him. But this time, Granny didn't ask for a proverb. Instead, she said, tell me my name, Upsalamana Tumpalarato. Oh, Granny, that's easier than a proverb, said the boy. Your name is Granny. He laughed and passed his plate. Uh-huh, said Granny. There are grannies all over the village. Every granny has a name. Tell me mine or no dessert. Granny took a bite of her bread pudding. Upsalamana Tumpalarato looked at Granny. She licked her lips and rolled her eyes. He looked longingly at the dessert. I will find out your real name, Granny, he said. Then I will have dessert too. Upsalamana Tumpalarato jumped up from the table and ran off to the village. He stopped the villagers and asked, do you know my granny's name? Or will you tell it to me plain? I won't get bread pudding or sweet potato pie until I tell her real name to her. Saying Granny just won't do her. The villagers circled him and sang, grass, plants, bees, bells, sky, birds, seas, shells, guava, plantain, mango trees. Call them anything you please. They will always be the same, 'cause Granny is your granny's name. The villagers danced as they sang the song over and over. Drummers picked up the beat. For a while, Upsalamana Tumpalarato forgot his question and danced quick steps to match the best of the dancers. Then he remembered, this won't get me dessert. So then he runs to the sea and he meets Turtle and he says, oh, teach me, Turtle, teach me, cried the boy. First, promise not to tell who told you, said Turtle. The boy promised and Turtle taught him his granny's name. Aha! So that's why Granny always says to me, your name is long, but it is not the longest. He thanked Turtle and ran home. Dessert, please, dessert, cried the boy as he ran into the room. Well, Upsalamana Tumpalarato, first tell me my real name. Your name is Mapacito Jacalindi Ipai Tacarindi. Why, Upsalamana Tumpalarato, that's right, uh-huh. She served her grandson a large square of bread pudding. Tell me, Upsalamana Tumpalarato, who told you my name? Oh, Mapacito Jacalindi Ipai Tacarindi, I can't tell you. Why can't you tell me, Upsalamana Tumpalarato? I promise not to, Mapacito Jacalindi Ipai Tacarindi. Well then, Upsalamana Tumpalarato, I'll find out for myself. And so Granny follows his route and she comes to Turtle and then she goes home. When Granny reached home, her grandson stood at the door with an empty plate. He'd eaten all the bread pudding. Oh, Mapacito Jacalindi Ipai Tacarindi, he said, now for some sweet potato potato pie. Aha, Upsalamano Templorado said, Mapacito Jackalindi I Pi Tacarindi. I know who knows our names. They smiled at each other and called out together, Turtle knows your name. Then Mapacito Jackalindi I Pi Tacarindi hugged Upsalamano Templorado and cut 2 slices of sweet potato pie. Thank you, Mapacito Jackalindi I Pi Tacarindi, said Upsalamano Templorado. I love your pudding. I love your sweet potato pie. Well, good, Upsalamano Templorado said, Mapacito Jackalindi I Pi Tacarindi, you can thank Turtle for dessert. Mapacito Jacka. But before he could finish saying her name, Granny clapped her hand over her grandson's mouth. Listen, she said, promise not to tell anyone else my name, and from now on, just call me Granny, and nothing more. Call me Granny, the way you did before. Upsalamano Templorado shook his head, and Granny took her hand from his mouth. Aha! Granny, he said, and furthermore, said Granny, from now on, I'm going to call you son. They burst out laughing and finished the pie. I love you, Granny. I love you, son.
That's wonderful. Just terrific. It's obviously not something you can read in the library quietly. Did you invent those names, or did they come with the original folk tale?
Well, in the original form, no, they were not like that. I developed them to give the story more character and more length.
Must have taken you half the time to figure out the names. They're just wonderful the way you would balance them, and they work against each other.
Yeah. Well, children love that play with the names. You know, the teachers will get all caught up in them. The children will pick up on them right away, and then they'll go on just calling them back and forth.
I think that's really one of the things that make your books so remarkable, that you really can't just sit back and just read them as a grown-up might read a novel. They invite you into the text, you participate in it, you help bring it alive. And I think that's something that children's books do in general that adult books tend not to.
Well, that's very important to me. You see, now, that's storytelling. It's from the oral tradition. All stories in the oral traditions with people of the literate written language are in books. When they're coming into books now, you want to bring in something, the feeling of the presence of the storyteller. And so it is meant to be heard. So it's being dealt with in a different way than if you're reading a novel or the newspaper or magazine or science or history. It's being dealt with to evoke the presence of the storyteller. I would like the reader to feel that the storyteller is with him or her as a story is being read, you see. And so by using these devices, I'm trying to recreate something that in Africa is theater. In Africa, storytelling is theater with the drummers and the other music. There's the dance, there's the back and forth chanting. Now it's in book form. How can I bring an equivalent to give some feeling of what a story would mean there? By opening up the feeling of the voice, the sound of language, working from the devices of poetry, that's my route. That's the way I try to bring it alive in its written form.
Have you traveled to Africa to actually see traditional storytellers at work, and have you learned from them?
Yeah. I have visited in Africa, but Africa is a huge continent, and I've visited a few places. But I've done mainly drawing when I was there, because you see, I'm working from the many languages of Africa. There are over like 800, 900 tribal languages, and I'm working from translations of these languages, because even a linguist would be hard put to deal with, you know, the variety of languages that are there if you're dealing with stories. And so I'm dealing with translations into English, into French or German, languages that I've worked with because as a student I studied in France and Germany. But I'm using these forms then to recreate. As I tell the children, I've traveled all over Africa and all over the world in the library.
What draws you to a particular story? I mean, you spend a lot of time looking at stories, and is it something in the language or the imagery, or what made you want to do this particular book, say, as a story? It's
generally the motif. There's something about the motif that I find interesting, amusing, or instructive in some way. Sometimes I work with a story motif because it relates to one that the children already know, and I want to open up to them story patterns travel throughout the world. They will find in Africa the same basic patterns of stories that you'll find in Germany, in England, in Scotland, in France. And so I will use a story, and they will immediately pick up on what that story relates to in reading that African tale. But it's generally something about the motif, the action of the story that interests me, and the fact that it's so badly told in this form, in this original form. That is, it's not really badly told, it's just that they worked generally getting written transcriptions of these hundreds of languages, and they would use story, and they would have the African language on one side of the page, a direct English translation on the other. Anthologists would take those direct English translations, but they would not get into it as a storyteller. They would simply correct the grammar. If it was he to the woods went, they would say he went to the woods. But if I see he to the woods went, to me it goes, why did he go to the woods? What was there? How did it seem? Was there anything going on there? What was on his mind? All these things will come to me, and I then become the storyteller, operating as a storyteller anywhere in the world would. And I then will bring in not only the research I've done at the Schomburg Library in New York City, which houses the tremendous collection on Black life and literature, but also recollections of my own family, my own neighborhood, phrases, things that I've heard, which feed into the story, which I can't resist, and they go right into it.
Do you think then that the African-American storyteller, artist, children's book author, does he have or she have special obligations? Does he have kind of a pioneering role in some ways over at least during the last 20 or 25 years, it seems that we've had a real flowering of artists from African-American backgrounds.
Yes. Well, that's very important because there are many young black artists coming along now, but there's still a very small percentage of what's coming out in young people's literature. I mean, it's hardly 1%, so you see it's still, say, a very small percentage, and we're doing all we can to encourage more and more to come into it. In my doing of the work and meeting with groups throughout the country, I'm always hoping that I'm opening it up when I'm meeting with the young people, that this is an area of work that might interest them, something that would open up what they were doing, and also to establish something of their own cultural contribution so that they will have some sort of spirit about what they have to offer. But there is always that sense of an artist, no matter who that artist is, of extending beyond him or herself. We all live in a context, no matter how much I might work in a studio or so. I'm thinking of my work in relation to audiences, and I would like that work to move out. I have that responsibility of relating and of making a sense of it being in connection with what people are experiencing and feeling and can respond to.
You've been traveling a good deal about the country, particularly since your retirement. Do you plan to do more public events and speaking, or do you hope to go back to Maine and work quietly for a while?
Well, I do have a lot of projects to work on, but when people have heard me at conferences and conventions, the way I'm working with the sound of the voice through poetry to my stories, they ask, will I come to their school, to their library, to their university program and share what I'm doing with the audiences? And that's what I've done and will continue to do, because that's an important part of my work, to get a direct response to how it's moving. I mean, does it make sense the way I'm working in my studio alone when it then meets with the audience? And so I do enjoy that as well. But I have to be careful that it doesn't overbalance and that I don't do my own work. Because as my editor has said, Ashley, on the road you may meet thousands of people, but a book will meet thousands more. So get to those projects.
Well, what's important is for you to keep doing your books.
Good.
We've been talking with Ashley Bryan, distinguished children's book author and illustrator. Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome. With pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on The Writing Life.